morning. Very good. Everyone enjoyed the National Review yoga at sunrise?
I skipped that for sure.
We all wanted to begin to stretch like a Democrat looking for an excuse to vote against Gorsuch. Just kind of really. All right. KellyAnne Conway doesn't really need that much of an introduction. You know who she is. But I think two things ought to be mentioned before we start. The first is this is the first woman to manage a winning U.S. presidential campaign. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that your accolades from feminists got lost in the mail somewhere.
That's all right.
And the second is, we saw a lot of discussion of this yesterday, conservatives may still debate whether Donald Trump is one of us. I don't think there's ever been any doubt that KellyAnne Conway is one of us. So, last night, Daniel Hannan talked a lot about courage. I don't think anyone can doubt that you have the courage to stand up for what you believe in when it feels like the entire world is lined up against you.
That's apt, but I do want to say that Donald Trump is a conservative, and I think you should look at his budget, his health care plan, some of the things that he's done by way of executive order early in his presidency, many of the principles he ran on, and he was able to engage many voters who were not necessarily as attracted to candidates in the past because they felt that the way to beat vanilla is not to be French vanilla or honey vanilla, it's to be Rocky Road, it's to really show contrast, and he was able to do that. So I think you'll be pleasantly surprised, and everybody knows Mike Pence, our vice president, as well, as a conservative. So I think the National Review crowd should be very happy.
Okay. American Health Care Act.
Yes.
Smooth sailing? Easy peasy? Everything's going great? Or...
So you know how the legislative process is in Washington, D.C. This is no different in that the House has its version, and by the time it gets to the Senate, there will be reconciliation, new amendments being offered. I would just remind everybody there are 3 phases, and I think it's important to note, because there was some information underload, as I like to say, at the beginning of the healthcare rollout. So phase 1 is really where you see the expansion of health savings accounts in the American Health Care Act. It's where you get rid of all the mandates, the penalties, the taxes. You had about 20 million people last year saying no to Obamacare, and 6.5 million of them decided they would pay the penalty, which is pretty remarkable, having a government tell you must buy this product and saying, gee, I don't want to, I'll pay the penalty, being penalized monetarily for not doing that. And the rest of them, in large part, Jim, they sought an undue hardship waiver. But you have people saying no to the exchanges. You have many people saying yes. They will be protected. The president had that as his second of 5 principles in his joint session several weeks ago. You also will see a continuation of coverage for pre-existing conditions and people staying on their parents' health care plan until 26, 2 very popular initiatives that's been around in this entitlement that's almost 7 years old. Phase 2 is the regulatory framework, where Secretary of HHS Tom Price has great latitude to go ahead and really take a look at every rule and regulation and decide whether it hurts or helps patients. If it harms patients, it's out of there. And he's going to replace it with a regulatory framework that is more patient-centric and free market in nature. The third phase is really where a lot of the goodies that many of you probably are most interested in exist. Why isn't it in phase 3? Because it's subject to 60 votes in the Senate, not 50, like phase 1, and it's not a regulatory question like phase 2. So the third phase is where you see the interstate mobility, being able to buy and sell health insurance across state lines, much the way you buy auto insurance or life insurance. And it's also going to tackle tort reform, med-mal, and get control of drug pricing. So those are some of the features of the third phase.
Okay. That seems like the part that people are having the hardest time with. And that's, as you saw, we had Tom Cotton here yesterday, in the sense of if 60 votes are what you need to get all the stuff you really want, the stuff that you really feel could transform the healthcare system. How do you get to 60 votes? Because I'm not seeing any Democrats lining up to help in any way, shape, or form. And we have 52 Republican votes right now. Even if you have a really fantastic midterm election, it's hard to see 8 Republican pickups. So where do those 60 votes come from?
So we're not looking at politics at all right now in terms of the next election. But I would just say that, factually speaking, the Democrats are defending 25 U.S. Senate seats next time, and the Republicans are defending 8. So just factually and mathematically, it's just a better map, if you will, for the Republicans. But we're not thinking about politics at all. Of those 25, the president and the vice president carried, I think, 10 of the states, 5 by double digits. So that ain't nothing. But in terms of getting the votes now, you're not going to see Democratic senators vote to repeal Obamacare, but they may vote to replace it, if in fact that's where this is going. And it also depends what's in that third phase that, cobbled up together in the third phase that does appeal to them. And that's being worked out now. Those discussions are ongoing. But I just have to say, this is no different. I was reading an article just this morning that even Obamacare had failed several times, of course, as you know, and the votes were delayed. It passed in the Senate in December, finally, and then again.
Back.
That's right.
Oh, yeah.
I saw him recently, and then the House, of course, passed it in March of 2010. So it's always a process. There's reconciliation. I know the president is very confident that repealing, replacing Obamacare will be realized, but I'm also happy that the Republican Party is not a party of just everybody in lockstep, always agreeing with whatever each other says. It's a big party with lots of diverse opinions. I don't really see that on the left these days. They seem to be about resisting and obstructing, even before they read the legislation, even before we know who Judge Neil Gorsuch is. It's, I'm not going to vote no matter who it is. Well, how is that practical or policy, or how is that the commitment you've made to your constituents to keep an open mind, for example?
Yeah. It seems like there's a pretty clear schedule of repeal and replace Obamacare, then tax reform, then possibly infrastructure. So do we have a sense of when we could see the ball rolling on tax reform? And if so, from the perspective of the administration, what absolutely has to be in there? What's the sort of thing where you're like, well, if we don't have this in a tax reform bill, it's just not worth doing?
So one other thing I'll just mention about health care, because we didn't talk a lot about Medicaid. The idea, too, is just to give greater flexibility to the governors so that they are funding and administering Medicaid closer to those who are in need, their own citizens. They understand what those needs are. And a lot of the Medicaid funding of late has really pulled so much of the money away from those it's intended to help, according to Secretary Price, the poor, the elderly, pregnant women, for example, the disabled, and it's gone to some able-bodied Americans who, again, if you want to reorient the money to where it was meant to be placed, then that is part of this healthcare reform as well. Moving on to tax reform, healthcare has to be done first, then tax reform. It's not like we're sitting around waiting and saying, as soon as healthcare is done, we'll turn to tax. The president ran on his tax reform proposal in the campaign, and you'll go back and see he's promised to create 25 million jobs over 10 years. And his tax policy presumes about 4% growth some years, because somehow we settle for far less than that as a nation now. He doesn't think we should be settling. It also takes into account energy investment. It really takes into account energy independence and explosion in energy, clean coal, certainly natural gas and all the traditional and energies, but he also just thinks, he's also said that, we always hear from people, nothing's made in America anymore, and I'm like, well, energy is, it's beneath our feet and off our shores, and it's time that we become more independent, self-reliant, and we also know what happens when towns and states start to explore and develop their own energy sources. You've got an explosion in job creation and wealth creation, and we just like those best practices. So in terms of tax cuts, he's been very clear about cutting the marginal rates, very, very focused on the fact that entrepreneurs in this country particularly feel like they can't grow, attract and retain a workforce, grow and expand. And the president has been very upfront as a candidate, as president-elect, and now as president, that it's the regulatory framework that's very suffocating to many Americans too, and many American job creators. But I think this is the president who's going to help the job creators, the job holders, but also the job seekers. And I don't know that we've always heard that whole surround sound message in candidates before. There's been a lot of emphasis on just job creators, entrepreneurs, you didn't build that, and then to the job seekers, the unemployed. But the vast majority of households are the job holders. And they are looking for tax relief, they're looking for regulatory relief, because they recognize that that's how you create growth. And so all of his tax reform plans also include better growth, higher growth rates, which has been missing.
Corporate tax rate, I assume, to be a big component of
Yes.
that? Okay. For some reason, when on the one we look on the right as this is a perspective that can create jobs, you free up profits, the company can then use that to build plants, expand things, hire people. But when it gets discussed in the media, it's always a certain sense of corporate tax rates, those fat cats in fancy, they always show the little man from Monopoly. Right? How do you get around that? How do you get around this idea of, well, a corporate tax rate wouldn't benefit me, I'm not head of a corporation, when in fact, obviously, the conservative philosophy on this is this has this, job creation effect that benefits everybody. How do you get around that, that suspicion people have when they just hear the words corporate tax rates?
You have to educate them. You really have to reach out and educate and inform people. And one thing that President Trump did masterfully as a candidate, in my view, is when he's talking about keeping the jobs from going overseas, he's also talking about keeping the company's wealth from going overseas. It's not just the jobs that are going there. It's also you're losing out the 70,000 factories that have been closed, for example, making that nexus between those job creators who feel that they were forced to close those factories here in this country for any number of draconian reasons, that creating an environment, Jim, where they'll no longer need to do that. They'll feel incentivized to keep those jobs here. Also, consumers know, but it's our job to make sure that they know too, that we educate and inform people, reach out to them. They know that when a company pays less in taxes, it can pass on those savings. It can pass on those savings to its consumers. And you see that the markets love the Trump presidency. You saw that, I think on CNBC 2 days ago, I read the article that home builders are more optimistic than they've been in a dozen years. You see a great deal of consumer confidence on the rise. You see the 235,000 jobs created in his first full month on the job as president in February, 4.7% unemployment rate. So the metrics that matter are going in the right direction, and people will start to, and that's really how his presidency will be judged in the short term and long term, frankly, is did people feel like they were more financially secure, they had more economic freedom, and that also includes the employers. I also think taking the word corporate, as you say, ends up being a big bad word, and reminding people these are employers. Some will call them, dismiss them as corporatists, and those are usually people who are employed by corporatists, by the way, more and more, and making sure that people look at them as who they are, which is job creators and employers.
Okay. You joined the Trump campaign around midsummer after a little bit of tumult in the campaign management. So you've actually been in this world, or on this for less than a year. I want to know, in that stretch of time, what your best day has been and what your worst day has been, and what went through your mind through each of those days.
My best day had to have happened at 2:30 a.m. on November 9th when I would think that was our best day. I like to say, Jim, it was a victory shared by many, but it's a future shared by all. And I say that mostly to our, quote, never Trump friends, because it's just, this is a future shared by all, and we appreciate everybody's support in orienting that way. I mean, a lot of days, if you feel down about something, you remind yourself who's not president, and it really does help. Because that was a culmination. It wasn't just that Trump Pence won. I was so proud of pieces of the electorate who for years, decades in fact, had told pollsters, I want to vote for somebody who's not of politics. I want to vote for somebody who has experience but outside of Washington. Somebody who goes to Washington owing no one anything and is not part of the system that I see that doesn't work for the average American. And they made good on that promise. And it's very difficult as an American to really make good on your unrequited love affair with change and choice and revolution and new things. A lot of people aren't really willing to exercise those choices, make those changes in their own lives. So the fact that they would do that in the political system was pretty remarkable. And I like the way Trump Pence won, which was with a fraction of the personnel and a fraction of the budget. At fraction of the budget, believe me. It forces you to be creative and innovative and really cohesive with the team and with the candidates. And Donald Trump's message to America that he's there for the forgotten man and forgotten woman is really key, because you see it in the policies to this moment, and it's especially key. I mean, I grew up with them. It's especially key because it brings into the larger free market movement men and women who either felt disconnected from that or not a member, not welcome perhaps. And his message went directly to them. I also have to say, as a free market person who believes in bottom up, not top down, almost anything, that for Donald Trump to take this fiction of electability which I have talked about probably for 20 years at NR types of events like this. This fiction of electability, us being told, you can win, you can't win, he can't win, she can't win, 2.5 years before an election. And then those people become the nominees, and guess what? They don't win. It's like he can win, and then they don't. And the Democrats never fell into that trap. They had they had nominees who people had hardly heard of, who represented fresh faces, new blood, outside the system a little bit, whether it was John Kennedy, Barack Obama certainly, Bill Clinton, Jimmy Carter, and all those guys were told, you can't win, don't even bother. You're a peanut farmer, you're the governor of the second poorest state, Arkansas, and you have this woman problem, you can't win. Thanks for the non-advice, he wins, he won 2 terms. Senator Obama was told what Donald Trump was told this time, which is, she's got it all wrapped up. And it turned out she's never had it all wrapped up. But, but anyhow, she's got it all wrapped up, don't even bother. And Senator Obama didn't take the advice and became a 2-term president. And so the Republicans always suffered from royalism. And I think Donald Trump just busted open. And free market people particularly should be really happy about that, because we did not have a free market, pro-competition way of nominating our presidential candidates. It made no sense to me that we're the pro-competition, pro-free market party, and we have no free market principles when it comes to our nominating process. So for Donald Trump to really take this fiction of electability and replace it with electricity from the grassroots up, it was a really great extended day. What was the worst day? The worst day,
I can think of a few nominations.
Well, none of the obvious ones, only because I just knew that Mr. Trump was never going to drop out of the race. I mean, if you really understand why he ran in the first place, it's not for the usual political motivators, frankly, prestige, power, money, fame. Hello, they had all that, and he and his family have sacrificed mightily. People do not understand the beginning of the sacrifice they've made to do this, and it should be respected, frankly, by all. But I knew he would not drop out of the race, and I knew that at that time, with the Access Hollywood tape, that for voters, there's a difference between what offends them and what affects them, and they vote on what affects them, and they ultimately did. And they looked at the full measure and how he might help them. So it would have to be 2:30 a.m. on November 9th, when Jason Miller, our communications director, said, the AP just called it, and I said, which state? And he said the whole thing. And that was about 2:29 a.m. because everybody was reluctant to call Pennsylvania, which sort of was my reach state. I grew up outside of Philadelphia, and it was just a state that always felt like Trump country. And he did such a great job there, as did Governor Pence. Mrs. Trump, our new First Lady, went there. Ivanka Trump, all the kids went there. Tiffany went to school there. She was campaigning there. Don Jr., everybody was there. So much in Pennsylvania. And it just felt like the Trump message would work in Pennsylvania. But the networks were reluctant to call Pennsylvania because it had 20 electoral votes, and that would sort of disprove everything they had said for years and hours before the election. But when we had agreed the night before, Robbie Mook had agreed the night before through an email to me, Hillary's campaign manager, that within 15 minutes of the AP calling the race for Secretary Clinton, they would wait 15 minutes, and then she would take to the podium and declare victory. So he was basically saying that you have 15 minutes for Mr. Trump to get out there. She's going to declare victory either way. And then he said, in the event that Mr. Trump wins, Secretary Clinton will call him within 15 minutes of the AP. So Jason Miller tells me that. I looked down, literally, it was like a movie. My phone was ringing. It said Uma Abedin. And I said, wow. Hey, Uma, what's up? And she's absolutely lovely. She really is. And I said, she's like, hi, KellyAnn. Secretary Clinton would like to speak to Mr. Trump. And I said, now? She said, is he available? I said, we're very available. And I handed him the phone.
You don't want to schedule that for later.
My husband took a screenshot of that, the 2:30 a.m. I handed him the phone, and he and Vice President Pence and their wives were there. And, the rest is history. So that was just really a remarkable moment. I think it was a remarkable moment for anybody, any David ever fighting a Goliath, frankly. any free market person who wonders if we could still build things from the bottom up, anyone who is ever being forced, and you all have, to be impervious to their naysayers and critics. I think that the fact that he was so impervious to his naysayers and critics most of the time was really key.
How many times in the past, let's say 8 months or so, have you wanted to get his phone and change the Twitter password?
0.
Really?
Yes, and I'll tell you why. 0. I would note, by the way, that many of the same people who were suggesting that to me during the campaign, take away his phone, take away his Twitter, and I say, I would absolutely never do that. I respect him. He's a grown man. This is the way he wants to communicate. That would never have been my thing, and he knows that. But those same people now will say, hey, I'm wondering if the president could tweet the following, or retweet the following. All of a sudden they like it. And by the way, they should not be asking me that. But in any event, I just ignore it. But in any event, I would say that, and the president says this regularly, I think he said it to Tucker Carlson in the interview that he provided from Michigan, where we were on Wednesday. He doesn't think he'd be in the White House without his social media platforms because, now these are my words, it allowed him to communicate directly with people. And I think a lot of the mainstream media don't like it because he's cutting out the middleman. So now with his social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, everybody sees his message at the same exact time. And that's whether you're a stay-at-home mom tending to your children, a plumber on the job reading your phone, the sort of cosseted, protected billionaire CEO having other people read Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for them and tell them what's going on, the academic in the ivory tower. It's the democratization of information. And the fact that people can see it all at the same time is another way of communicating with the forgotten man or forgotten woman. He communicates and connects directly with them. I frankly have never seen anybody do it as brilliantly as he does. I'm not saying just on social media, I'm just saying directly. And this is, that's going to continue.
Mm-hmm. You've been in Republican politics for a long time, and you were political famous. With the election of the president, I imagine you're really living in the fishbowl. What's that like? I can only imagine. I've seen the grief you get, the criticism. Every comment you get is dissected. Is that sort of thing where you're like, oh my God, what has my life turned into? Or
I no longer eat the ice cream right out of the container because it'll go viral. Somebody's watching, but
well, is the microwave watching?
Yeah, nobody could take a joke either. But that is definitely true. Humorless Washington.
You made that comment, and I remember thinking, like, maybe she knows something that the rest of us don't about microwaves. That,
I know.
Defrost gives it both video and audio, or something.
I know plenty that others don't, but that's okay. That's my job, and the president certainly knows a heck of a lot more than any of us know, which is the way it's meant to be. So, on your question about the fishbowl. I don't consider myself famous. I don't consider myself a celebrity because I was a pollster who went on TV once in a while, and I really did just try to bury my head for decades and build this firm, and I had it for 21 and a half years. Very happy that the conservative movement was a big stable of my client base over decades. And then I happened to run a campaign and go on TV a lot, and he got elected. By the way, I get a lot of credit. We had a magnificent team, and I think 2016 also proves that in addition to a magnificent, small, cohesive team where we're all in the foxhole together and are there now in the foxhole together, there is really no substitute for quality candidates who know how to connect and communicate with people. You simply CEG Hillary Clinton. I mean, you can't make this up. You can't pretend it away. You have to have a message. The message is not you're bad and I'm not you. You have to have a message that works for people and that they understand and relate to and that's accessible and compelling. So the fishbowl is very hard on my children most of all because they certainly didn't ask for it, and they're 12, 12, 9, and 7. And it's truly not fair to them. I'm not one of these Hollywood celebrities who post pictures of them on Instagram. We had a local county magazine into our home this past Sunday in New Jersey for a Mother's Day cover story that's supposed to run in about a month and a half. And instead, the people who took the pictures put them online that night. And they are guests in my home. These are my children. And yes, we allowed it for a county magazine, not to then wake up the next morning and see them all over the globe. I had a friend in Hungary sending them to me. So it's hard on them. I have 24/7 Secret Service. I don't think they would be there if they didn't have to be. They're absolutely amazing, amazing men and women. professionals. But at the same time, it's the world we live in. And I'm there to help in my small way the president and the vice president have an impact on real people. And I know they already are, and I know that they will continue to be. I struggled with going inside. I was very public about that because I'd be asked about it even though I didn't want it to be about me. But my kids are bad ages for that. And be very frank with you, I was staring at a gold mine to stay outside, and it took me a while to avert my gaze. I'm a free market girl, capitalist. But I decided ultimately in discussing it with the president, the vice president, their spouses, others who have served in administrations, that the place to have impact is there. And we really want to do that in quite quick order. So
you talked a moment ago about how the Trump campaign ended up really transforming the way campaigns are. They didn't need necessarily all the financial advantages that everybody thought they did. It's I kind of wonder, are Republican candidates in 2018, if there are other Republicans out there who are like, I'm going to do it, I'm going to run for office, are there lessons they can take from this? Or is there some of this, like, look, he's Donald Trump. He's already famous. He's already well known. He's already got this brand image connotated with wealth and success and all kind of stuff, that if you're, Joe from Ohio, it may or may not work for you. So if a Republican candidate said, what lessons should I take from this campaign? What would you tell them?
I would tell them that the old saw of what works in politics is still the same, Jim, which is message, messenger, and delivery. But delivery is less a style now and more a system. I think the Donald Trump style was very compelling to many voters because he's just a larger-than-life force of nature who was known to people from outside of politics already. But don't forget about his message. And when he started to talk about policy from the stump as well, he would say, here's my 10-point plan to reform the Veterans Administration. And he has a 10-point plan to do that. But he also would put a lot of his personal flourish in there, and I watched him do it directly. It's his pen who crosses out sections, who writes things. He certainly did it with the joint session recently, where he is saying, these are his words, if we don't take care of our veterans, who are we as a nation? And you have people who have never voted or never voted Republican in their lives nodding their head emphatically with that very simple, non-political idea of decency, of right versus wrong, not right versus left. So I would tell people, sure, you can have your 10-point plan, your 4-point plan to combat radical Islamic terrorism, your 5-point plan to reform the tax code, but you also have to tell people why you're doing this and what it really means in the larger picture. And also, he had a great deal of humor out in the stump, if you go back. He really had a good time. A lot of candidates look like they're getting a root canal. He had a really great time out there. And never seemed like if it didn't work out for him that he was going to self-destruct in 12 seconds or less, that he had something else to do and somewhere else to go. And even though people knew he was making a commitment to them in running, that it was very refreshing to many candidates that he didn't need this, that he was doing it for the right reasons in their estimation. The other thing I would say to you is that, people talk constantly about the value of being a non-politician, but more succinctly, he did not erect a traditional campaign. He built a movement. And it's easier for people to feel like they're part of a movement than a member of a campaign. And that, because it's a movement, it's less about money and fundraising. It was less about special interests. It was less about Washington speak. And then also, I think he was willing to call out the right boogeymen. If you look at the approval ratings of different industries, he was able to run against them and point out when they were being unfair to him or when they weren't working for we the people. And he was quite effective in doing that as well. So I would advise them to run their own races. I'm not sure the traditional route is unattractive anymore. If you're a state senator or if you're a member of Congress, you want to run for governor or senate, I think that traditional route still has merit. People like that you have experience. But I think there's just also a big opening and a welcome mat for people who do not have the traditional political experience. The other thing I would say is just, if you're running as a Republican or a conservative now, there's probably never been a better time to do that, just because you're running against the opposition who seems really stuck. They've lost almost 1,000, Democrats lost almost 1,000 state legislative seats in the 8 years of President Obama's administration. They lost control of the House, control of the Senate. Nancy Pelosi lost her speakership with a majority of voters being female. Just thought I'd get that in there. And, Hillary Clinton lost and They seem beholden to, and of course they lost the White House. They seem beholden to the extreme elements of their party now. Where are the boll weevil Democrats? Where are the blue dog Democrats? Where are the pro-life Democrats? Where are the pro-Second Amendment Democrats? They just don't exist anymore. And if that's the party you're running against, you automatically are going to have a very positive free market, lower tax, less regulation, stronger national defense, stronger dollar type of, I think protecting the sanctity of life, a big part of the party. And look, I just have to say, to have a Manhattan male billionaire who for much of his life was pro-choice give the most impassioned defense of life in the October 19th debate that I've ever heard, I thought was pretty remarkable. And he followed 15 days earlier his vice presidential running mate do the same in his debate, Mike Pence against Tim Kaine. So that's actually, I think that too showed a great deal of contrast. The last thing I would say is putting out the specific list of 20, and it was a supplemented list in September, putting out the specific list of 20 men and women whom he would consider nominating to the Supreme Court mattered to some of the fence-sitting voters because it was specific. And you can look at the list and you can learn about the judges on your own or through what we were releasing on the website. And that mattered to people. That mattered very much to people, that it wasn't just judicial philosophy, but they were actually judges on the list. And he made good on that promise by nominating Judge Neil Gorsuch.
Okay. I think I speak for everybody. I wish they could go on all day, but they hold up 3 signs. 5 minutes, stop, and the Secret Service is mad at you. So I think we have to wrap
They're
this
the
up.
best.
Ms. Conway, thank you very much for your time.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks.